Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Social Workers Everywhere podcast, where we uncover the powerful, diverse, and far reaching impact of social work across the globe.
Each episode, we spotlight the practice, research, and experience of students and social workers from a wide range of industries and professions, from clinical care to policy change, from leadership to grassroots advocacy and community engagement.
Through the voices of the University of Maryland School of Social Work community, including faculty, staff, students, alumni, and global partners, we'll explore unique perspectives and innovative initiatives shaping the future of the field. Today, we are very excited to be interviewing two students, Christa Gloster and Claude Thomas. We are talking today about the India course as a global opportunity for students. This course was developed many years ago based on a long-term partnership with Rajagiri College in Kerala, India. This course is really about going to India. Students engage in an international conference and then have different site visits, cultural experiences, and then also have time to have fun in the mountains, at the beach. I was able to fortunately be a part of this trip as one of the co-teachers, myself and Dr. Joan Pittman. And so Christa and Claude and 8 other students joined us on this trip. Let's get started.
Christa and Claude, first question. When you heard about this experience, could you share with us two things that came to mind? Was this recommendation from a professor or through the Elm?
Claude, you want to go first?
I saw this in the Elm. I also think there was a more targeted email about this opportunity that came through my inbox. That's how I found out about it. I had originally learned about the opportunity to do my field placement internationally, but that was not an opportunity that was aligned for my circumstances. And so I was disappointed about that. When I saw this opportunity, I immediately wanted to learn more because I wanted to have the opportunity to learn about social work in a global context. The ability to only be abroad for 2 weeks worked out perfectly with my life circumstances. And then my family is originally from Kerala, India. So I was especially excited that we were traveling to that part of India because I could really integrate my personal and professional experiences that would carry me forward into my career.
That's great. Thank you. I just want to put a plug again for reading The Elm. That's kind of been the theme of this podcast.
Yes.
The Elm.
Yes. Yes.
Fair enough.
Flag it and read it on the weekends.
For me, I'm pretty sure I also heard about it through a targeted email in my inbox. I didn't have an opportunity to study abroad or do anything similar in undergrad. And I worked full time. So I actually had the funds and the resources to be able to do something like this. And similar to Claude's situation, I knew I couldn't do an international field placement. But I was like, this I can pull off for 2 weeks. And so it aligned with my schedule and actually had the funds and resources to be able to do it.
So, thinking about this trip, what were some of your perceptions about the experience before traveling to Kerala?
I love to travel and have been a few places. So I'm familiar with the experience of traveling internationally, but hadn't been to India in any way, shape, or form. And so, one, I wanted the opportunity to get a place off my bucket list
Nice.
in a way that was in a group where I felt comfortable and had people to help me navigate. But I think perception wise, while I was in the program and on the trip and in the class, worked full time in kind of diversity work, I was very familiar with different community and local voices talking about colorism and fat phobia and different types of things. And so my perceptions were based off of what I had read, and I definitely try to focus on voices from the area that I'm coming to. So as soon as I figured out I was going, I was like, all right, who are the scholars? Who are the people in this area? Who can I read? Who can I be looking to get information from? But those were, at the forefront of my perceptions before we went on the trip.
What about you, Claude?
Yeah, I think I went into this with very much an open mind. I'd never studied abroad before. And so I didn't quite know what to expect in that regard. And this was a bit unique in that it wasn't a full semester, it was condensed into 2 weeks. But also having a personal connection to where we were traveling to. I think that I've traveled to Kerala multiple times. I've visited but it was always in the context of family. And
Right.
so I was really eager and curious to see what it would be like to travel outside of that context and how much more I would get to experience as a result of that. I also was reflecting on how the way I had been raised and how I had learned about the culture is that it is very community oriented. It's very much mutual care for one another. And so, as a social worker in the United States, I was very curious to see how that profession would be taking place in India, where there's already this different underlying set of cultural values.
I guess on the lines of that, how did these perceptions shift and change throughout your experience?
So Lynn and Claude were with me. I had a very interesting start to my trip in India. Our first night there, the airline completely lost all of my stuff in terms of my checked bag. So I just had my carry-ons with me. But I will say the folks that we went with were incredibly supportive. Having folks to debrief us was helpful and helped me re-engage in the purpose of the trip. So I think something that definitely shifted for me once we got there and like got through the first few days was the stark contrast of how central colorism is. And so we talk about colorism in the context of the United States. And I think one of the conversations Claude and I had while we were there was we can point to examples of different skin tones of people in like media, on billboards and things. But when we got to Kerala specifically, like all the examples of people in terms of like advertisement, marketing, media were very much like fairer, lighter skin. And then you just look directly underneath the billboard to someone who is like 2, 3, 4 shades darker. And like having that just like jarring comparison right there in front of you for the entire trip was something I knew was a thing, but just like didn't expect it to be that central and like that like easy to spot.
Getting to travel with a diverse group of peers was definitely very interesting because I've been aware of these cultural issues within the diaspora, but I hadn't experienced it myself in India because there I'm in within the majority. And so witnessing what it's like to truly move through so many spaces with privilege was it gave me a lot to reflect on. And then there was a lot that I learned from my peers and their experiences and getting to reflect on how I could use my privilege there to support them while they were traveling through the country. Professionals there, it was really interesting to see how right now there is no licensure for social work in Kerala. And so seeing the incredible work that they're doing and yet the barriers that they're facing because the profession is not entirely legitimized also gave me a lot to think about. There was this integration of Eastern and Western values within the profession because social work was brought over from the West. And so there is that element to the practice and how it's accepted in communities.
I wanted to also bring up, as you were talking, I remember this incident. There was a little shop that sold coffee and snacks at the conference center. In between sessions, groups of the students and Joan and I would go down and grab a coffee. I remember I went down with another student who was also Black, darker than me. They ignored her, like saw it in plain sight. They absolutely ignored her but served me. And I'm used to light skin privilege in the States, but seeing it in another context was really stark. What advice would you have for students that would like to attend this course?
I would say don't let your perceptions or your fears about what might happen deter you from going. Like a pre-brief meeting before we went, and we talked about a lot of things because for folks who will eventually take the course, there's like a semester's worth of work you do beforehand and meetings and stuff that you have, and then a pre-brief meeting. And so we talked about traveling internationally to colorism, to racism, to homophobia and transphobia, to disability and ability. And I would say to everybody's point earlier, we had a very diverse group of people that were with us. And so I think for folks who want to go on this trip, the advice I have would be to ask the questions you need to ask. You can prepare, but don't let the answers deter you from going. As someone who was excited to go, but also very nervous in terms of just a new environment. That's just something that happens to me. And I think to a lot of people, I still wanted to go. So don't let that deter you from going. And also what you need to ground yourself. That was also part of the reason me losing my bag was such a struggle, because I had all of my grounding items in the bag. And so once I was able to get my luggage and get my stuff together, it was a lot easier for me to process through the day, because I'm also neurodivergent. So there were just lots of things that I needed time to reset. Overstimulation is totally a thing. Specifically, the parts we were in, it's a lot of people. It's big. There's things happening everywhere, lights and everything. So if that is something that you're going to need, just make sure you have your stuff to be prepared. Go, but just be prepared.
That's great advice.
I would say approach this experience with both curiosity and humility. The assignments before we actually went abroad were really wonderful in prompting just deeper reflection and getting to explore a little bit of areas of interest that each person had within social work, within the context of international social work. So definitely make the most of those assignments, but then bring that curiosity with you when you travel. And like Krista is saying too, there's so much that is in our control and isn't in our control. And so also that humility to just keep learning and taking everything in stride is also really helpful. You'll learn so much from not only the people you meet there, but the people you're traveling with.
I always tell folks that there's always a plan B, C, D, and you just keep going, it works.
On this trip, I've noticed and heard a lot about identity. I'm curious to a part A, part B question for you both is, how do you define your identity in these spaces? And then part B is how did you navigate the different aspects of your identity, both positive experiences and challenges?
Do you want me to go first?
Yeah, good.
Hold on it. Yeah. I definitely experienced privilege moving through everywhere that we were traveling, partly just by recognition. I have features that people recognized and understood as someone who has ties to that area. Also, my language skills aren't great, but I understand Malayalam enough to move through colloquial conversation or just things to get by. That was helpful in terms of the little things that I think really made a difference in the treatment that I received, but also the ease that I felt moving through spaces. I think there were some opportunities, for example, to serve as a communication liaison between a local person and one of my peers that I certainly did not take for granted. And then in terms of other aspects of my identity as a woman, I definitely was careful about my surroundings and ensuring that I wasn't going anywhere by myself. That really just came from prior knowledge and also just the concerns that you take into consideration in spaces you're not as familiar with. And then I think there were other aspects of my identity too that I was cognizant of within the space of my peers, but maybe less willing to share in spaces that I was just meeting people or who were acquaintances. Like my queer identity, for example, it was certainly relevant, but not something that I openly shared with colleagues that we met at the conference, for example. And that's just taking into consideration how culturally that's not something that's openly discussed, right? So those are my first thoughts. Maybe Krista, as you share, might think of something else.
So, as I mentioned earlier, I am neurodivergent. I'm also Black and queer. And a lot of my questions early on stemmed from what I had read and heard and watched about the experiences of queer folks in India and also Black folks who had traveled abroad before. I was aware, obviously, there are going to be cultural differences that lots of folks maybe just have never seen Black people in real life before. But I think what to me ended up being jarring feels like the word that's coming to mind right now. It doesn't feel accurate, but we'll stick with jarring for right now. It's just the freeness folks had to want to like touch me, which is a thing in the US, but I think it's more commonly known, like stop touching people. Don't do that. That's strange. But the amount of people that are like, can I touch you? Can I touch your hair? Like, how do you get your hair like that? We were in the middle of a tea field and a random couple and their child were like, hey, my wife wants to take a picture with you. And I was like, I'm sorry, what? So it was just stuff like that. Or I remember one of our classmates, shout out to Theo, was with me. We were having an overstimulation break because it was loud and we were outside. And so we just stepped aside to grab some air and take a moment. And there was a photographer who had visited an Ayurvedic hospital. And there was a photographer documenting the whole experience, taking pictures, normal stuff, at least what I felt like made sense. But he had asked, like, oh, can I take a picture of you? I'm like, sure. But I guess the way I was positioned, he asked me to turn so he could get my hair. And I'm like, it's just hair. It doesn't do anything. There were other experiences that I certainly had to navigate. That one for me was the most difficult one because I just felt on display the entire time in a way that I don't feel in the US. I recognize that we are a very multiracial, multi-ethnic, multicultural society, especially in Maryland, where we're coming from. And so just to be in a space where folks have literally never seen potentially someone that looks like you and are not understanding just how you function and exist as a person. And so that for me is what I had to process in real time. Okay, are you actually in danger or is this just curiosity? And overwhelmingly, it was just curiosity. Folks were just interested in figuring out how I was doing, how I was existing. But that's not something I've ever had to break down before in that way. Because, you know, being from Maryland, it's Black folks everywhere. So no one is trying to touch my hair or figure out, like, taking pictures. This person just wanted to take pictures of my locks. And I was like, it's just hair. It doesn't do anything. The last thing I'll say about this is we had gone to a boys' home, which for some folks in the US, they may consider that like an orphanage. And one of the young boys there, he asked if he could touch my hair. And I said no. And he's like, okay, cool. And moved on. And so I'm like, you're like 8. And you get it. Like, you get personal space, you know enough to ask and like be okay with my answer. Whereas you had whole adults trying to push me into having interactions with them, whether it be a picture or a hug or like touching my hair, whatever it is. This little 8-year-old was like, got it. No worries. Let's move on. I just thought that was very interesting to see the difference between how grown adults responded versus like an actual child.
Kind of shifting to, thank you both for sharing that experience. What similarities did you see between our school, University of Maryland School of Social Work, and Rajagiri College School of Social Work? And more generally, differences and similarities between social work practice in both settings. Do you want to start with the first one? So the kind of similarities, differences with, and you spoke about this some, Claude, with Rajagiri and our school.
I would say one similarity, but also difference is, of course, they have field work as well, or field placements. They rotate to different agencies as opposed to our program where you have one placement for the entire academic year. I think that's very interesting because on one hand, getting to be at one agency for 9 months means that you really get to dive deep into that particular organization and their mission, different opportunities to get involved, and also develop longer term relationships with clients. But I also think the students at Rajagiri who are able to, I think it's every semester that they go to a new placement.
Yes.
So that's double the breadth of experience that they get. And so, especially for social work students who are looking to explore different areas within the field to identify what calls to them the most, I think that's an incredible asset for that kind of program.
Yeah, we were talking about this in the previous episode of the importance of social work in terms of understanding the micro macro, and that's what makes us social workers, because we have the blend of both, and it's not just the individual work. But I think they may have more of an opportunity to have that understanding combination.
I would say, speaking about differences, something I really appreciated about their School of Social Work is the opportunities they have for community engagement and development. Not that we don't have those, but for me, it felt like that was the bulk of their program, steeped and invested in community in a way that ours is not particularly focused on. We're largely a clinical program. I also recognize that comes from the fact that that's not a model of practice they are able to do in Kerala. That would be one difference. I wouldn't necessarily say it's the name, but like the type of field placements they're able to do is a little bit different. We, as a part of the course for folks in the future, there's an assignment where you connect with a student from Rajagiri College and you talk about social work, life, all the things. And the student that I connected with, her name's Alita, and she was doing the acronym is, I think, personal PSR, personal social responsibility, or corporate responsibility.
Corporate
Social responsibility. I don't think that's not that we couldn't do that here with our program, but the way that it's an actual pathway, like that's one of their subspecializations in their programs, and people think about that and pursue that often isn't something that we particularly have carved out in that way. So that was another difference that I appreciated.
And I'm pretty sure that's a requirement of all companies, correct?
Yeah, that's a requirement in India. I cannot remember the actual policy or legislation, but every company in India is required to have some type of department entity that does that type of work as part of their standing to be an actual company. Oftentimes, social workers are doing that work for them.
Right.
How did this program impact your professional development? And can you name 2 to 3 things that resonated about your experience?
I can go first. I have a couple things in mind. So the first is I currently work for a nonprofit within the space of disability justice. And prior to this course, my experience with disability in India and how it's perceived and approached has been very family oriented. Like families take care of those who need support. I personally had not heard of any government sponsored support for people with disabilities. I have family who are disabled, and that was the model that they experienced, was just within the community. When we went to Kerala in January, we went to visit 2 organizations that specifically serve people with disabilities. And it gave me a lot to reflect on in terms of, one, just the progress that is being made and the effort that's being made to support the disabled population locally. One of the organizations was ultimately funded by a corporation. And then another of the organizations was church funded, I think through the Catholic Church.
Where the boys were?
Kripa, right?
Yeah, because they had the mural of one of the.
And so on one hand, I was really heartened to see that there's organized efforts being made to support the disabled population in terms of providing education, vocational training, and even employment opportunities. And at the same time, also seeing how there are differences in the language that's being used that in the context of the work that I do here in the US might be considered stigmatizing or ableist. And then having to take into account, they're telling us about their organizations in a second language. English is not their native language, even though English is spoken in Kerala. And so it just gave me a lot to reflect on in terms of, again, that progress, further progress that I would love to see made, but also how important is that language when there's also tangible work to be done. Like, there's just a lot that it gave me to think about. I was able to discuss with my peers on the trip to give me more insight. The other big takeaway for me was I've been a clinical student, and my goal is to be able to provide culturally competent therapy services based on my life experience growing up and seeing how much mental health is stigmatized within the South Asian community, within the Indian community. It's been really important to me to be able to just improve the accessibility to these services. Thinking about this within the context of clinical social work, I was talking to one of the PhD students at Rajagiri, and she was sharing about her experience within the program and where she is headed professionally. At this conference we're hearing wonderful lectures about different social work initiatives. She was saying how important it is from her perspective to integrate micro and macro social work, because It's great to be talking about these social initiatives, right? And talking about
Yeah.
things on a systemic scale. Casteism has been dismantled, but it still pervades every single aspect of society. And work needs to be done in addition to everything else that's currently happening is that micro level work within families, within communities, those interpersonal relationships. And that is ultimately why I was motivated to pursue social work and clinical social work in particular to address things from a relational perspective. And
Mhm.
so that was really affirming to hear that there's this beautiful synergy between clinical and macro social work, even in
Yeah.
addressing these larger systemic issues.
Co-sign what Claude said. I will also add for me that I'm also a clinical student. Prior to switching career paths to social work, an educator, and did a lot of like community engagement. And so what I appreciated from this trip was the eagerness to communicate across cultures. I spent time between sessions at lunch talking with people, whether it be someone who had a session I really enjoyed and wanted to follow up with folks from other universities, students even from Rajagiri, and just really providing an opportunity to sit and have a conversation. Of course, we talked about social work, so that's what we were there for, but we just also talked about life, which is really nice. And how often are you going to have an opportunity to just sit with somebody and talk to them about how they live their lives and their lived experience? So for me, the biggest takeaway was never be afraid to pursue opportunities to engage. For me, at least, I won't speak for anybody else, but for me, that's why I got into social work is because I appreciate that this is a profession and that I have met people who are like, we should be working together globally. Like the fact that we are so siloed across the world is ridiculous and makes no sense. I really
Absolutely.
appreciate the opportunities to engage with people but also just to laugh and make jokes and like to, by accent and other things. Like there are obviously lots of folks, and you could tell we were from the US. I had somebody either from Scotland, I feel like it was Scotland, just reached over at the conference. It was like, you're American, right? I was like, yeah. And they're like, you okay? I was like, no, I'm not okay. Thank you so much. I'm not well. I'm not okay. And they were like, we're thinking about y'all. I was like, thank you so much. They get it. So it was really nice to just have those very human moments. And that's my biggest takeaway. Always, if you can, engage in the opportunities to do that. Whether you're uncomfortable or you think you might be uncomfortable or you feel like you're missing something, just go and do it. I even had conversations with Lynn over dinner while we were in the middle of the mountains. I'm like, Lynn, you got any more projects? You need some help on? I'm happy to pop in and you let me know. So yeah, that was something that really stuck with me. When we went to Kripa, they had a sensory room that I think about all the time because I work with children and families right now. And we have a playroom, we have a small sensory room, but that thing was like 2.5 rooms large. It had every texture, sand, and the lights out, the lights did things. And so that is the sensory and texture room of my dreams as a neurodivergent human who has texture issues. I wish many me had something like that.
Well, thank you both so much for your time and insights and being vulnerable and sharing your
Yeah.
experiences. Is there anything else that you would like to add that every prospective student should know about global social work at UMB?
The diversity in our peer group spoke for itself, not only in identity, but also areas of interest within social work and future career
Mhm.
plans. So, on that note, anyone would be a good fit for this program if they have a desire to learn. I think it
Right.
would enrich any social worker's career.
Along the level of like connecting with peers as an introvert is sometimes it's hard for me, to come out of my shell and connect with new people, but it is so worth it, not just to connect across the conference and with the agencies that we met with, but with the group of peers we went with from the University of Maryland. We've already done a reunion dinner. They're some of my favorite people that exist in the world. 5 of us just graduated this past May. We all got to take a picture together with one of our other professor, Dr. Joan Pittman. And so if you are nervous about a new setting and making new friends, I hear you, I understand, and also do it because it's one of the best experiences I've ever had. Truly, my peers that went with us on this trip, including our professors, some of our favorite people, and the endless amount of foolishness, I'll call it, and inside jokes that we have is truly comical. Like, we don't have time to get into all of them. I wish the same or a similar experience for you should you decide to go.
Thank you, listeners, for joining us today and for listening to the Social Work is Everywhere podcast. If you've been inspired by the stories and impact shared today, please consider supporting the University of Maryland School of Social Work. Your donation helps fund scholarships, research, innovative teaching, and community partnerships that make a real difference.
Every gift matters. Please visit ssw.umaryland.edu/give to donate.
To request more information about admissions to the University of Maryland School of Social Work, please visit ssw.umaryland.edu.
Go social workers.